I need a list of all non-compliant vendor contracts by the end of the day, or I will start cutting heads. Brody Vance barked, leaning across the glass table like a reality show contestant, mistaking aggression for competence. And just like that, I knew North Peak Solutions had let a fox into the policy henhouse. It was my third week working under Brody Vance, a freshly imported vice president with a jawline sharp enough to slice through a spreadsheet and a personality like a root canal during a fire drill. The kind of guy who called human resources the feelings department and thought legal regulations were suggestions, not facts. He had been brought in from one of those venture-backed tech startups, where everyone had job titles like vision engineer and growth hacker. Here at North Peak Solutions, we ran on compliance, legacy infrastructure, and whispered warnings. So when Brody landed loud and swaggering, the quiet people like me braced for impact. I am Oliver Wright, policy analyst, corporate archaeologist, silent fixer of messes made by louder men. I am 58 years old and 14 years deep at North Peak Solutions. I had built a reputation for being the person you called when the contracts folder looked like a toddler's art project and the legal department was already halfway into a panic attack. I do not wear blazers with shoulder pads or use words like synergy. I do not circle back, I just clean up behind the ones who do. I also do not speak unless I am sure the room needs listening, which meant I did not say much at first when Brody swaggered in, took one look at my 3-monitor setup, and said that someone was compensating. He laughed. I did not. Neither did Simon, the junior analyst who had been shadowing me for 8 months and already had anxiety from reconciling vendor tax forms. Brody called him Kiddo, Sunshine, and once Data Elf. So, we knew what we were dealing with at the time. Brody did not notice me much at first. That is the thing about loud men. They only register silence when it turns into thunder. And I was thunder in waiting. I had spent over a decade ghostwriting half the policy documents this company used to cover its liabilities. My fingerprints were all over onboarding templates, risk disclosures, and HR protocols. Brody, on the other hand, was allergic to whispers. He wanted his signature on everything. If a document did not start with his name in bold, he would skim it, grunt, and say to make it more punchy. He also had a knack for turning staff meetings into hostage situations. The first time I saw him run a team sync, he used phrases like move fast or get moved out, and compliance is optional if you are winning. Simon actually gagged into his coffee mug. It would have been comical if it were not so dangerous. Because Brody was not just annoying, he was sloppy, and sloppy men in powerful positions break things. He started reorganizing departments without notifying HR, rewriting vendor contracts with vague language that made our legal counsel twitch. He called the legal team the slowdown squad and had this habit of deleting sections from shared documents without tracking changes. A walking HR violation with a corporate credit card. Still, I did what I always do. I kept my head down and logged everything, because that is what quiet people know. The louder they are, the faster they fall. And Brody was building himself a very tall ladder. The first real crack came during a Thursday afternoon pre-audit meeting. Simon had been prepping compliance summaries for an upcoming client review, his first big project. He had done the work, double-checked the dates, cited the right clauses. But Brody skimmed one line, misunderstood a metric, and detonated. He snapped, asking if Simon was trying to get us fined, tossing the packet back across the table. He called it amateur hour. Simon turned sheet white. He tried to speak, but the words caught somewhere between his throat and shame. He looked at me. I looked at Brody. That was the first time I opened my mouth. Quietly, clearly, I said that Clause 9.2b on that page is about historical data, not current exposure. His numbers are correct. Brody stared at me like I just insulted his intelligence. He asked who I was. I gave a half smile and said I was the person who wrote Clause 9.2b. He blinked, then laughed, calling me another policy gatekeeper who thinks footnotes are a weapon. I said nothing else. Something shifted in the room. Simon sat up straighter. Another analyst smirked into his notebook, and somewhere, invisible but listening, the CEO of North Peak Solutions, Montgomery Reed, was quietly nodding. Because the moment had come and gone, but the echo would grow. And next week, when everything burned down, they would trace the spark back to this exact meeting. This exact line, this exact moment, when the silent man with the receipts finally spoke, the meeting room reeked of dry erase marker and ego. Brody had commandeered the whiteboard like it was a battlefield map, scrawling buzzwords with the fury of a man who thought due diligence was a personality trait. He had drawn a giant cross over a vendor list Simon had compiled, circled it twice, and underlined it. He sneered, tapping the board with a marker, demanding Simon explain the number, or admit he just copied and pasted from the internet, hoping no one would notice. Simon looked like a deer blinking at oncoming traffic. His knuckles whitened around his pen. He stammered that it was from the Q4 reconciliation report, matching the projected threshold. Brody cut him off with a scoff, asking if we were just taking finance's word now and calling it hope and prayers. Simon shrank in his seat, trying not to cry, which made me want to flip the table. Instead, I breathed in slow. I stated calmly that Simon was correct. The threshold accounts for the deferred penalties under Addendum 4. It was approved last fiscal cycle. Clause 9.2b protects that adjustment until the review closes. Brody turned toward me, asking if he requested my opinion or if I was volunteering to be next. There it was, the public challenge. He needed to prove that no one could check him without bleeding for it. I kept my voice even, stating I was not offering an opinion but quoting policy, which is my job. He stepped toward the table, gripping the edge, spitting that legacy types were always hiding behind procedure instead of stepping up, claiming that was why North Peak had been circling the drain. He promised Potty was cleaning house, making air quotes around dead weight. The room fell silent. Simon looked down. No one made eye contact with me, not even the ones who knew Brody was wrong. Because when power stomps its boots on policy, the only thing louder than the lie is the silence around it. I could have said more. I could have pulled up the audit log and exposed every sloppy edit Brody had made. But I did not yet, because policy is not just words, it is timing, and my timing was razor sharp. So I nodded once and sat back. Brody smirked like he had won something. But he had just exposed his fatal flaw, and I had written the appendix he was ignoring. The rest of the meeting blurred into grunts and groans and more half-baked ideas. Brody wanted to launch a new third-party risk strategy without notifying the legal department. He said things like, "We do not need to be that compliant, and if it has not bitten us yet, it will not." I resisted the urge to bang my head against the laptop. But the damage was done. Simon had been publicly dressed down. I had been challenged and dismissed, and the seed, the one I had buried deep under quiet obedience, started to stir. Because here is the thing about quiet people. We are not silent because we do not know what to say. We are silent because we are always listening, always watching, always documenting, and sometimes we are the only ones who remember where the real power is buried. That afternoon, I returned to my desk and opened a folder I had not touched in 4 years. It was password protected, buried under 5 layers of archived memos and audit logs. Inside was Brody Vance's executive onboarding packet and one clause with my name in the metadata. I did not read it yet. I did not have to because I remembered exactly what it said, and so would he soon. Brody loved the sound of his own voice so much. I am convinced if he stood alone in a canyon, he would try to out-echo himself. He paced like a discount motivational speaker, telling the room that if they screwed up during a compliance cycle, they should not expect a warning. They should expect a replacement. He punctuated that with a sharp click of the whiteboard marker like a judge slamming a gavel. Never mind that 3 departments were in the middle of prepping for an audit, so sensitive it had its own internal messaging channel labeled, "Do not screw this up." Brody thought pressure made diamonds. He did not realize it also made lawsuits. Simon was pale again. His fingers trembled as he minimized the shared spreadsheet Brody just torched. Brody had blamed him for a formatting mismatch and declared that visual errors undermine confidence, as if the auditors were grading us like a science fair project. The room was still full. Finance, legal, procurement leads, and Brody had just raised his voice in front of all of them. Not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. The last one ended with him slamming a printed report on the table and growling that this team was making him look incompetent. That was the moment I clicked open the internal compliance drive. No theatrics, no fanfare, just a soft series of keystrokes like a scalpel slicing through the chaos. I spoke evenly without looking up, stating that during active compliance review periods, no disciplinary action or performance-based threat may be levied without legal oversight and documented justification. The air left the room like someone had opened a pressure valve. I kept my eyes on the screen, adding that it is in the Employee Policy Manual, page 62. Final revision signed off by General Counsel, 2020, still active. I was not reading for drama. I was not trying to win the room. I was trying to end the bleeding before Brody cracked someone so hard we would be paying for it in settlements. Brody straightened slowly, nostrils flaring. He asked if I was quoting human resources policy to him mid-meeting. I finally looked up and said no. I was quoting North Peak policy, which he had signed. He blinked. Someone coughed. I heard the head of procurement shuffle her papers just to do something. And somewhere deep in the call interface, hidden in the muted list of remote attendees, I saw it. A name, M. Reed. Montgomery Reed, Chief Executive Officer of North Peak Solutions, joined muted, camera off, silently listening. My stomach did not drop. It did not rise either. It just paused like the moment before a fire alarm sounds. Brody's jaw worked like he was chewing a nail. He sarcastically called me the policy police. I replied that I was just tired of watching junior analysts get publicly humiliated for doing their jobs right. It was the closest I had come to raising my voice in years. It still barely registered above a whisper, but it hit. Brody's face went red, then pale, then that awful shade of managerial beige. He did not say another word. He just reached for his laptop and muttered something about moving on. The meeting limped forward. I did not feel victorious. This was not a coup. I was not trying to topple a regime. I was just a tired man watching another fool with a title stomp through a house I helped build. And I had patched too many policy holes to let him kick through another load-bearing wall. It was not rebellion. It was enforcement. And the thing about enforcement is it does not have to shout. It just has to exist. The rest of the team started taking notes again quietly, heads down, but the temperature had shifted. Even if they did not say it, they felt it. Something cracked. Not big enough to notice at first, but loud enough for the right person watching silently on the call to hear. After the meeting ended, Simon lingered by my desk. He whispered that I did not have to do that. His eyes glossy but defiant. I gently closed my laptop and told him that sometimes silence is complicity. He nodded once, and in that moment I knew the ripple had started. It hit my inbox at 8:14 in the evening, right as I was halfway through a microwave dinner. The subject line read confidential for your eyes only. No preview text, no copy line, no footer full of legal disclaimers. Just one line inside. Well played. We should talk. I stared at it for a good 20 seconds before clicking anything. It was from Montgomery Reed, the CEO, the man whose presence was typically reserved for shareholder meetings and company-wide emails. I had not spoken to him since the day he shook my hand in the lobby 14 years ago and said they value people who think. Turns out I had been thinking a little too clearly. I checked the headers and verified the sender. It was real. Montgomery had emailed me directly. Just 6 words that vibrated like a hidden tripwire finally snapped. My stomach did a slow, careful flip because it remembered something. Not everything, but enough. 4 years ago, during the messy ousting of a former vice president who detonated half of procurement with an off-color joke and a $150,000 unauthorized retainer, legal had pulled me into a backroom policy consult. Quiet, off the books. I was asked to ghostwrite clauses for an updated executive onboarding protocol, tighten loopholes, reinforce compliance accountability, and build in behavioral guardrails. It was billed as a generic update. The lead counsel had referred to it as a future-proofing effort. That meeting ended with a non-disclosure agreement. The kind that does not just say, "Do not talk." It says you did not even hear this. It also bore Montgomery's signature in blue ink. I had filed the whole incident away like a classified document in my brain, until now, until Brody, until Directive 18-1514A started whispering to me. I minimized the email and stared out the apartment window. My dog, a golden retriever named Max, blinked at me from the rug. The street outside was quiet. Rain drizzled in a pathetic little drizzle. But in my head, gears started turning loudly. Why me? Why now? Why just well played? It did not feel like praise. Not exactly. It felt like confirmation. He had been waiting for something, watching from the shadows, and I had accidentally flipped the signal by reading one clause out loud. I opened the email again. No attachment, no meeting invite, no instruction, just the implication that something had begun or resumed. I searched my old files, dug through archived folders, and eventually found a PDF that made my pulse spike. Executive Onboarding B. Vance Draft 3 sign. It was not my version, but I recognized the clause structure. My fingerprints were all over the syntax, clean language, tight definitions, embedded escalation triggers. I had not known who it was for at the time. Now, I did. I did not open it. Not yet. Because suddenly it felt like staring at a bomb schematic with my initials in the corner. Instead, I sat very still and did what I always do when things go sideways. I started taking notes. Everything Brody had said in the meeting, his tone, his phrasing, who was present, who looked away, who nodded, who stayed silent. I created a timeline and marked key moments. I color-coded potential triggers, and I saved it all to an encrypted folder labeled for later. Because this was not about Simon anymore. This was not even about Brody. It was about something else, something bigger. Something that started with a contract I helped write, and a man who had signed it, assuming no one would ever dare invoke it. And now the CEO had noticed the match was lit. The question was, did I mean to start the fire, or did I just find myself holding the torch? The freeze did not come all at once. It crept in like a draft through a poorly sealed window. At first, it was just one meeting. The weekly compliance huddle I had run for 10 years suddenly had a new invite, hosted by Brody, with my name absent. No explanation, no direct message. Just a calendar void and a vague messaging ping from Simon asking if I was on the agenda for today. I played dumb, saying it must be a glitch. It was not. By the end of the week, my workflow had been sliced like deli meat. Long-term review projects were reassigned. Vendor audits were redistributed. A legal operations thread I had been nurturing for 4 months was now being forwarded to someone named Julian, who once confused a net 30 term with an invoice number. I was not being fired. I was being erased softly, strategically. But I knew what it was. Retaliation, plain and simple. He could not yell at me in public again. Not after Clause 9.2b. Not after whatever signal that email from Montgomery had triggered. So instead, he did what all cowards do when they cannot attack you directly. He tried to make me disappear by inches. But you cannot delete the hard drive while it is still plugged in. Simon stopped by my desk the following Monday. He said they asked him to rework the deliverables from that vendor audit I started. His voice low, eyes scanning the room. Brody said my format was too dense. I smiled thinly, asking if it was dense or accurate. Simon said both, then leaned in, adding that he was not changing anything. He just thought I should know. Then he slid a coffee onto my desk and walked away like he had not just committed professional mutiny. An hour later, a surprise email pinged from the legal department. Subject: quick clarification request. It was from Eleanor Frost, General Counsel. She never reached out directly unless something was on fire. She asked if I still had archived copies of the vendor compliance logs from Q1 and Q2 of last year, mentioning there was some confusion around edits, and mine were usually the cleanest. She added off the record, "Well done last Thursday." My hands paused on the keyboard. I did have those files, not just the summary logs, but versions, annotations, and flag notes. I had everything because I never delete, and I never assume the last version is the safest. I pulled the folder up from my encrypted drive. 10 minutes later, another ping on the internal messenger. This time from Julian, the chief financial officer. He heard I got benched and wanted to let me know I was not invisible, offering budget traceable support to back my files. That was 3 allies in under 24 hours. None of them loud, none of them performative, just quiet signals like birdsong before a storm. And then came human resources. I was eating lunch at my desk, scrolling through vendor disclosures, when my screen blinked with a video call pop-up from Diana, the HR business partner. No invite, just a message asking if I had 5 minutes to chat privately. 5 minutes became 22. Diana did not say Brody's name once. She did not have to read it. She said they were doing a routine internal documentation review, and it had come to their attention that there might be discrepancies between finalized documents and submitted backups. She asked if there was anything I was aware of that might help clarify record integrity from the last 12 months. That was corporate speak for help us before this gets ugly. I confirmed that yes. I kept detailed logs and was willing to forward backups through the secure drop. By the time I ended the call with Diana, I realized something. I was not just a witness anymore. I was the keystone. Not because I planned to be. I had spent most of my career trying to be the opposite. Background noise with a 98% accuracy rate. But when someone like Brody kicks the wrong pillar out from under a structure, the ones who have been silently holding it up tend to become very visible. And in visibility, there is power. Uneasy, unfamiliar power, because I still did not know what Montgomery's email meant. I still did not know if this was a full investigation, a silent test, or a corporate chess match with me as the accidental queen. But I knew this. Brody was cornering himself with every reassignment, every deleted invite, every cheap little ego move. He was scribbling his own indictment in real time, and I was collecting the receipts, one folder at a time, one ally at a time, one silent nod at a time. The freeze had come, but so had the thaw, and I was right at the fault line. 4 years ago, the air in the legal conference room was thick with burnt coffee, tired rage, and the faint hum of risk management unraveling in real time. Back then, it was not Brody, but a different face with the same problem. A vice president had gone off script during an investor queue and accused the compliance team of kneecapping innovation. Then he had followed it up by firing a mid-level auditor mid-review live on a video call while legal was on the other line, trying to walk back a regulatory breach. The fallout cost North Peak Solutions a $150,000 penalty and a year of goodwill with the board. The executive walked with a golden parachute, and Montgomery Reed, he did not say much, but legal heard the silence and started sharpening knives. That is when Eleanor Frost, general counsel, called me in. She had flipped open a blank draft of the new onboarding framework and told me I was going to help them install a dead man's switch. She used words like behavioral controls and executive risk frameworks. But the message was clear. The next time someone in a suit tried to bulldoze compliance mid-audit, they would not just get a slap on the wrist, they would get the boot. No severance, no spin, no soft exit. I was asked to integrate provisions reflecting the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Section 806, preventing retaliation against whistleblowers and compliance officers. I wrote Directive 18-1514 Alpha. Any executive found to publicly threaten, intimidate, or retaliate against legal or compliance staff during an active review period forfeits all severance, bonuses, and post-employment privileges, constituting a breach of fiduciary duty and violation of federal whistleblower protections under 18 U.S.C. Section 1514 Alpha. Said behavior shall trigger an automatic independent audit to be completed by a third-party firm within 21 business days. Clean, surgical, ruthless. I remembered feeling proud of the language, like I had injected common sense into policy. The clause was filed, signed by legal, blessed by Montgomery, and quietly sewn into the tail end of the executive onboarding documents. No fanfare, no training slide, just a trap waiting to be sprung. And I moved on. Until Brody. Until I watched him stand in that meeting, puffed up and snarling, and threaten me in front of half a dozen witnesses while I was actively citing policy during a compliance cycle. I did not realize what I had triggered right away. But when Montgomery's email arrived, it hit me full force. Brody did not just make a fool of himself. He violated Directive 18-1514A on tape with multiple staff present during a scheduled compliance review, while threatening both me and Simon. He had activated the clause I wrote. The consequences were severe. Severance gone, bonus forfeited, references revoked, reputation in review, and an automatic third-party audit. Every sloppy deal he tried to fast-track, every missing document, every redacted contract note would now be under a microscope. He had yanked the pin out of his own grenade, and I had handed him the explosive 4 years before. That night, I could not sleep, not because I felt guilty, but because I finally saw it clearly. I was not just a bystander. I was instrumental. The audit began quietly. By noon, everyone knew something was off. 2 men in suits asked for the last quarter's vendor audit logs. Legal booked the small boardroom for a week straight and blacked out the calendar. The official word was an internal process review, but unofficially, we all knew the audit had begun. No one was frog-marched out of the building. It was just the slow, tightening coil of silent attention wrapping itself around the compliance floor. At 10:36 in the morning, I received a calendar invite from Wallace, an external auditor from a third-party consulting firm. Subject: Confidential Documentation Review Session 1. Duration: 45 minutes. Attachments requested any relevant documentation from the meeting in which staff interaction with Mr. Vance was observed. I did not flinch. I opened my folder. It was already ready. Every quote, every timestamp, every moment, Brody barked, sneered, or threatened. I had annotated his tone, captured his interruptions, and flagged the clause violations. When I walked into the room, it was just Wallace, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and a clinical demeanor. He said they were reviewing records to establish a pattern. I handed him the flash drive, explaining that everything was time-stamped, including chat transcripts, version history from shared documents, and my own notes. He raised an eyebrow, noting it was thorough. I replied that so was the misconduct. When I left, I passed Simon heading in. He nodded sharply. We were all part of this now. Witnesses, carriers of the truth, quiet ones who had been pushed too far. Brody, on the other hand, was losing altitude fast. He started clawing for traction, louder meetings, more copied executives on emails, wild accusations that someone was undermining authority by weaponizing policy language. He tried to bury records too. Emails that had been visible on Monday suddenly went missing by Wednesday. Chat threads were mysteriously archived, version histories were erased and re-uploaded. But the louder he got, the smaller his circle became. By the end of the week, he was eating lunch alone, holding meetings in empty rooms, and asking Eleanor from the legal department questions, like if someone misremembers protocol, is that grounds for dismissal? To which Eleanor replied deadpan that it depends who is misremembering and why. He even tried reaching out to me. He sent an email at 9:52 on a Thursday night asking to align on messaging regarding compliance protocols. I did not reply. By then, it was not my voice that mattered. It was my silence. Every whisper, every quiet moment of discomfort that had festered under his reign of arrogance was now being captured by people with clipboards and legal backing. The building felt tense, like the walls were holding their breath. I felt precise. I was just the snowflake that started the avalanche. The invite hit my inbox at 7:12 in the morning. Executive Committee Emergency Session, Conference Room A1. My name was third from the top. Compliance analysts did not get invited to executive committee meetings. We were the scaffolding, not the show. And yet, there I was. I did not ask questions. I just put on my blazer, grabbed my folder, and walked into the lion's den at 8:59 on the dot. Montgomery Reed sat at the head of the table. His expression was made of marble. Brody was already there, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking around like he was counting escape routes. Everyone else was silent. Eleanor from legal, Julian the CFO, the new chief operating officer, a few board advisors, and me. Montgomery opened a leather folder and nodded to someone near the screen. A video clicked on. It was a standard meeting recording, but the sound was crystal clear. Brody's voice boomed first, his rant, Simon's silence, and then my voice calm and clipped, correcting him with clause 9.2b. The recording ended. The screen went black. Montgomery did not clear his throat. He just flipped open a second folder with a tab that said B. Vance Onboarding Documents. Montgomery read aloud. Directive 18-1514A, emphasizing the forfeiture of severance, bonuses, and post-employment privileges due to retaliation against compliance staff, citing the Sarbanes-Oxley Act Section 806. The silence that followed was absolute. Brody opened his mouth, then closed it. His skin turned a pale shade of white. Montgomery closed the folder slowly. He stated that compliance is not a department, it is a safeguard, and when leadership decides it does not apply to them, the company suffers. He turned to me and thanked me for my diligence, asking me to remain after the meeting. I nodded once. Brody tried to say something about misunderstood context or internal tone, but it did not land. Eleanor slid a printed copy of the clause across the table, like a poker dealer showing the losing hand. No one spoke for him. The man who tried to rewrite the rules learned what they sounded like when read back to him, word for word, in front of everyone who mattered. He stood up. Montgomery did not tell him to leave, but no one stopped him. Brody opened the door himself and closed it behind him. On the other side, the empire he thought he owned kept breathing without him. Montgomery waited exactly 5 seconds. Then he stood, smoothed his shirt cuff, and told me to join him next door. I gathered my folder and followed him to a small windowless office. A thick leather folder sat on the table. Montgomery told me to close the door and sit. He did not waste time. He slid the folder toward me and offered me the position of Director of Compliance Strategy, effective immediately. The compensation packages were outlined. I would have hiring authority, direct access to the legal department, and a dotted line relationship to finance. I opened the folder. It was real and already signed. Montgomery leaned forward, saying I was supposed to be invisible, which was why they trusted me to help build the clause. He noted that invisible people do not usually get tested, and when they do, most fold. I said nothing. He added that I did not fold. I clarified. He stood, signaling the meeting was over, telling me to take the weekend and let him know on Monday. He said the seat was always meant for someone who knew how to hold the line. He left. Before I could reply, I stayed in the room a moment longer, staring at the offer. Director of Strategy. All the things Brody had talked about like trophies, I now held in my hands like an afterthought. When I stepped back into the hallway, Simon was there, arms crossed, looking proud. He asked if Brody was gone, and I nodded. His smile was small but steady. Back at my desk, the messages had already started coming in from the legal department operations and the CFO's office. Each one a tiny tether reconnecting the pieces Brody had tried to sever. The freeze had thawed, the ripple had become a wave, and somehow, without ever shouting, I had ridden it all the way to shore. There was no retaliation, no revenge, just precision and presence, because the truth is I never wanted to be seen. I just wanted to be correct. But sometimes in this place, those are the exact same thing.